Oh, hey, how you doing? So in this video, we are going to discuss the benefits that street photography can give you as a photographer. So grab yourself a coffee and stick around. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another video here at Benham Media. I am Nathan and it's an absolute pleasure to see all of your wonderful smiling faces here today. Thank you so much for clicking on my thumbnail. So, within this video, we are going to discuss 5 possible benefits that you will gain when you start street photography and the ongoing process that you sort of like, the things that you learn, the things that you sort of naturally pick up the longer you start doing street photography. So buckle in, let me know in the comments if you feel these are correct or if you feel the benefits of these things yourself. It'll be lovely to discuss with you as we go forward. Now, street photography is usually one of the most popular genres when it comes to photography. It's usually the first thing that a new photographer will try to do. They'll take the camera, they'll go into the local area, into the local town or their city, and they will try to start taking some wonderful shots of their urban environment. And myself personally, it was something that I sort of grew into when I started going out into the streets. If many of you watched us before, you will know that I am in fact a portrait photographer when I started, and because of lockdown and I couldn't get any clients, I decided to go out in the streets and start taking street photography. When I started thinking about this particular video and the benefits that it has sort of like brought me, and it sort of came to birth when I looked at a lot of the photographs in my sort of like archives when I started doing street photography to what I got now, and I sort of like compiled a nice little list that I feel that I benefit of, and I've had a discussion with some of my friends who are also street photographers, and they seem to sort of agree with these 5 top tips. So, first things first, what is street photography? Now, the working man's description of street photography is if you are anywhere in a public space and you take photographs of people or the architecture in an urban environment, you are in fact a street photographer. That is sort of like the ballpark figure of it. Now, there are many who will sit there and argue that to be a true street photographer, you should start taking your photographs and process them in black and white to try to sort of honor the sort of like old school masters back in the day before digital photography became a thing and everyone shot in film and they had to develop it themselves at home, and to put color in those type of photographs cost a little bit more money. But in recent years, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, it's not really sort of the case. I do like my black and white photography, and I do know a lot of photographers who do also enjoy it. But street photography is now definitely coming into the lines of like it being full color, especially when you start thinking about light exposure photography as well, you know, because you like getting those little light trails. So, long story short, if you are out and about in an urban environment and you are taking photographs, it is in fact street photography. But let's have a look at what I would say my first benefit of becoming a street photographer was. Number 1, you become a faster and better photographer. Now, this could also sort of come across onto other genres such as food, product, portrait photography, most definitely. But there is something about street photography that sort of seems to make you a faster photographer. Now, the reason I think this is because when you're out and about, you are trying to capture a particular moment in life. A moment where someone's on their phone, or they're walking across the street, or there is an object going past, and you have to try to get that moment in time, boom, just like that. When it comes to product photography or food photography, your subject is stable, it's standing there, and you've got time to sort of fiddle about with it, make sure it's correct. And even when you're doing portrait photography, you can discuss with your model, hey, can you look this way, can you look that way? But when it is street photography, you're walking around and your camera is charged and ready to go, and you've literally got, oh, that's sensational, and you snap away, oh, that's brilliant, and you snap away. And then you also start sort of trying to pick out the subject amongst the chaos. That person sat on the bench feeding the pigeons, the bus driving past Big Ben at that perfect opportunity, the bird in the middle of the London Eye. And it's just sort of like you're capturing a single moment in time that's not gonna happen again. So you want to get that photograph right there, right now, because once you've taken the time to set everything up, the moment is gone. So you become faster as a photographer, and I think you become a better photographer because you start to notice these things naturally. It took me a while to sort of, as I was walking around the streets, to sort of go, oh, is that good? Is that something that people would like? Is that something people would sort of like click the big thumbs up button on Instagram? But eventually I just simply walk around town now. I'm like, oh, that looks brilliant, or that's fantastic, or that guy's doing that, or that building with that shadow looks, and you sort of naturally become more equipped to recognizing these scenes. And this is why many photographers choose to shoot in aperture priority. Now I shoot manually because I like having control over all of my settings, but if you're doing a good run and gun type of street photography, the aperture priority on your camera is a great way to definitely sort of get you the feel of what's going on. And if you don't know what that is, that basically means you will switch your camera to aperture priority, this little symbol just here, which means when you turn your dial, you are dealing with the aperture, the focal length or depth in your camera, and then your camera will try to figure out everything else by itself. So it means you don't need to worry about your shutter speed or your ISO. All you got to worry about is the depth of field, and your camera will do its best to figure everything out. So if you are in fact starting out in photography and you don't quite understand how to get all of your sort of like the triangle settings going, try using aperture priority and then sort of build up and build up and build up. So that's number one. Number two, you become very familiar about the type of gear that you need for your type of photography. Now, again, this is probably something that you'll go through in most genres, but with street photography and going into the fact that you get to learn how to use your camera properly, you will look at your scene and you'll know, right, this ISO needs to be 100, I think my shutter speed needs to be 1/250, and I think my aperture should be f4. And you instantly know these things, especially when you start using your different lenses. Now, I generally sometimes shoot with my 50mm, which is a great street photography lens, and I know my lens inside out, knowing what I can capture with those particular lenses. A lot of photographers like to shoot with a 35mm and an 85mm to try to get that compression. And you know, if you are using the zooms, which I sometimes use my, 55 to 18mm lens, which is a nice kit lens, which is really brilliant because I can get that sort of like different types of depths of field, and also is a good zoom lens to start yourself out with. But you sort of naturally start to learn these things. When you first take your camera out as a beginner, you start sitting there going, oh, you know, you'll take some duds, you'll have a bit of a figure around, you have a little bit of a look, and all of a sudden, you know, not only have you missed your moment, which will take us back to point number one, but it also means that when you see a scene, you go, right, these are the settings that I need, and you've generally already set up your camera to those particular settings to make sure you capture those photos as and when they happen. But also, again, going to aperture priority is a really cool way of getting to learn that, because if you only have to concentrate on one particular aspect of the triangle, if you look at your settings after you put them into your software, you can get like a rough idea of what your camera thought would be the best settings for that photograph as well. So it means you get to learn on the job, and yeah, that's quite a nice little quick one, really, isn't it? So that's number two. You get to learn your gear a lot better. Number three, it will help reduce your anxiety when you are interacting with strangers. This is something that I was definitely suffering with when I started out doing street photography. I found it very difficult to sit there and take photographs of people doing their normal day-to-day business. One, mainly because I felt I was intruding on them. Two, I really sort of felt like this is their lives. They don't want me shoving a camera in their face. Hence the reason why I take an awful lot of my sort of people photography with a sort of like a longer lens, so I could be a little bit further back. And these are the two things that a lot of people do in fact suffer with. To shoot people doing their day-to-day lives can be quite unnatural. It can feel very uncomfortable for the photographer, especially if you've got yourself a sort of like a narrow prime lens and you do in fact need to be quite close to the person to get a decent picture. You can find different tactics and different ways of being a little bit more covert. You don't necessarily need to be in the face, but I've got a couple of friends who have literally no fear whatsoever to go up to somebody in the street and go, oh my God, you look sensational, can I take your picture? And you know, what's the worst that can happen? They say no. You go, fair enough, and you walk away. Sometimes what can happen as well is that people will notice that you're taking a picture. They might think you're taking a picture of them, so they go, excuse me, would you mind not taking my picture? And you go, yeah, no worries at all. And again, you move on. when you live in a city such as London, and I suppose most major cities have this as well, a lot of the sort of ground space is in fact private property. So you will get approached by security asking you what you are doing, and you have that sort of confidence to go, oh, I'm just taking some really, really cool pictures. It's for my personal use. Is that okay? And they go, yeah, no worries at all. You carry on. They'll probably tweak the little rules every now and then by saying, oh, can you not make sure you take pictures of that? Can you make sure you not take pictures of that? You know, this is fine. You know, after a while, you get to learn these sort of interactions with these type of people, it being security, because that can be quite daunting to begin with when you've got a guy in a high vis and a radio approaching you and you start to panic because you think, oh, have I done something wrong? You haven't. You're in a public space. You are allowed to take pictures as long as you're not being too sort of rude or in people's faces, and you can just have a nice conversation with these people, and eventually they'll go, yeah, no worries at all, you crack on and you enjoy yourself. Now, number 4, you have a heightened awareness of your surroundings. When you start out as a street photographer, you might be a little bit nervous, as we've discussed already, and you're not entirely sure where you're going or what you are doing. But eventually, as time goes by, the more walks that you take, and especially if you start taking walks with other photographers, you start becoming very sort of acutely aware of a moment that's about to happen. Like, you could be walking across a bridge, for example, and you've got a sensational architecture in the background, but all of a sudden you know that there's going to be traffic coming through. You say, oh, do you know what? I could get a really, really good long exposure shot here. Or if you take a little look by a river and you're like, oh, the tide's going to go out very shortly, so I can start going down and get some nice low angle shots of the city's landscape, and so on and so forth. You automatically become aware of situations before they're about to happen. I've noticed it a lot, especially in my last few walks that I've taken out. And when I had the meet up with a whole bunch of photographers in London as well, you sort of start bouncing ideas off people and you start seeing things differently. And you're like, wait a minute, like, I've just taken this picture of Piccadilly Circus, but if I wait a few minutes, I could probably get this picture which is about to happen with this traffic coming through, or this pigeon's about to fly up. And you just have sort of like a sixth sense of your bangers. You don't start taking normal photographs or bog standard photographs or a photograph that you've seen 1,000 times on Instagram. You start taking your own individual shots which make you stand out as a photographer. And this is just something that eventually just comes to you. It's like a eureka moment. All of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I've stopped taking the same boring photographs, and I'm now taking some photographs which I've not yet seen on Instagram or online or on other forums. And it just sort of, you just sit back and go, wow, I've officially turned the corner as a street photographer. And number 5, you become an expert in your own particular city. Now, I shoot in London. I've been shooting in London for the last 2.5 years, and I know at different times of year, at different times of day, at different days of the week, what shots become better. I know that if I shoot on a Monday, if I go into the main city, it is going to be busy. So there's a high chance that I'm going to get some sensational sort of normal day-to-day reaction shots of people walking around. And if I go during sunset, I know for a fact that at this particular moment, there's going to be a fantastic shadow coming over this way, or the sun's going to be going behind these buildings, or there's going to be a wonderful light reflection coming off these buildings. And if you are an early bird, you know for a fact that the sun's going to come over here, you're going to do this. And if you go out on a Sunday, especially if you're in the sort of like financial district of London, you know it's going to be quieter. So you could probably get some nice empty streets, long shadows shots of that particular area. And you could also probably get some individual sort of empty shots with just one person crossing a road with nothing else around. And you become an expert of your own surroundings. Now, I personally want to start going out to other cities. It's something which I'm now looking forward to do now that the world has definitely started to open up a little bit more. Go back into Europe, travel around the UK and take photographs of other cities, because, you know, it's always nice to sort of be a little bit more acutely aware, but it's also nice to sort of like in my mind, to have a bit more of a, best way to put it, a new surroundings. You know, I'm not taking photographs of the same old things, but then again, even though I am taking photographs, for example, St. Paul's, I take hundreds of photographs of St. Paul's Cathedral, but I always try to find something new. And I know that building so well that I also know what light it's going to hit, what time of year, the sort of sun's going to be around it, when it's going to bounce off it. And I've recently taken some really, really nice shots of it in the evening, which, you know, for my own personal use has really sort of opened my eyes a little bit more for that particular building. Now, with all these things rolled into one, what that can also do is that if you are starting out as a sort of beginner photographer, you have a day job, eventually you might start looking at this genre as being your day-to-day business. It might want you to be a professional photographer, which is exactly what has happened to me. I started out working in bars, I was an actor, I needed a full-time job, and I did everything else on the side. Because of lockdown and the fact that the hospitality industry sort of shut and stopped, I sort of inverted into myself, and I went into YouTube and I went into my photography, and I started learning new skills and new ways to use my camera. And when I started going out into the city and I became more and more confident as a street photographer, when the world started opening up again and my old boss called me up and go, "Hey, how you doing? Do you want your job back?" I comfortably and confidently said no. I do not want my job back. I am now a photographer, YouTuber, and all of a sudden my main source of income is coming via this genre itself. And I couldn't be more happier. I couldn't be more happier. I loved my job in the bar. I love the people that I work with, and you know, I miss many of them on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, photography can in fact be a bit of a lonely job. You are pretty much walking around by yourself, but that is the reason why, especially with the use of Instagram, you can start opening up and reconnecting to the actual environment that is within street photography. There are hundreds of us out there. Go online, have a little look on Instagram, and start connecting with some of the hashtags that you actually use inside of Instagram as well, and start communicating and connecting with other photographers as well. And all of a sudden your community has started to open up. So I now don't need to work in my bars to have a community, because I've got a brand spanking new one. And the wonderful thing about that is that they are interested in the same thing as I am, and all of a sudden my ideas and everything else starts to open up. But guys, I'm going to end that here. This is my 5 sort of surprising benefits that street photography can give you, not only as a person, but also as a photographer. And I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. Again, like I said, if you have in fact felt the benefits like this, please write them in the comments, come and find me on Instagram, give this video a like. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. That way you can stay up to date with everything that I do here over on Benham Media. But guys, until next time, thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.